Trust your dog. A few months ago I was sitting on my front porch enjoying a peaceful afternoon. I live out in the country. My closest neighbors being over a mile away. Just me and my dog watching squirrels run across the dirt road. About mid-afternoon a fellow stops out by the road and asks to enter my yard. I wave him in. Seems like a decent enough guy. As he approached the steps my dog moved to block him. The dog was growling lowly and his hair was standing on his back. This was unusual. The man asked if he would bite. I replied he's meaner than hell. He isn't mean and has never bitten anyone. But this guy doesn't need to know that. So he stands in the yard and introduces himself as the son of a neighbor down the road a piece. He has moved back home to be with his mom who is getting up in age. We make pleasant small talk back and forth. My dog stays between us. He doesn't take his eyes off of this stranger. He isn't growling but the hair on his back is still standing. This puts me on edge as well. I bid the fellow good day and walk into the house. After watching him drive away, I do a search of the name he gave me. It doesn't take long to find out he is a registered sex offender. I felt shivers down my spine. Being that I have a wife and teenage daughter, I felt it necessary to call the man's mother. I told her to inform him not to be around my place anymore. I have always heard a dog can spot bad in a person. I believe it now. Good boy. 3 young teens came to my door to escape. This just happened about 15 minutes ago and was one of the weirdest encounters I've ever had. My family and I, 22F, were sitting in our living room, watching TV after dinner. All of a sudden, there's an unexpected knock at the front door. I go to open it and there are 3 young teens, sophomores in high school, that I don't know. They tell me that a few guys are following them and they needed to look like they knew someone. I told them immediately to come inside to evade the people following them. The teens told me it was 3 younger boys, probably 8th grade, that had been following them as they walked 8 miles from a gas station nearby to my neighborhood. I went outside to try to see if I saw the boys, and sure enough, they were just down the street. When I stepped outside, they yelled, "Lacey. Is that you?" I didn't answer, but went inside and asked if any of the girls seeking refuge were named Lacey. None were. My dad then went outside to tell the boys to move along, and they got super mouthy and rude. Eventually, they went up the street and out of sight. However, they came back down a few minutes later. So I opened the door and yelled for them to leave, but they argued with me and wouldn't go anywhere. My dad went back outside, and a neighbor heard the yelling and came to see what was happening, with the threat of 2 grown men. The boys finally left, not without some lip, though. I then drove the 3 teens back to one of their houses so they could evade the boys and get back home safely. Something was really weird interactions with the young boys. I don't know what they were looking to do, or if they were just looking for trouble, but something did not sit right with me. Just glad the 3 teens felt my house was a safe place to go. Something bad happened while I was camping. I'm just not sure what. I'm not sure if I'm in the right place, but I've held this story in for the last 6 years because it sounds crazy and I got told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend of mine. The campsite we picked was beautiful. We were able to drive in through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that weren't very far from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely no one was around. We set up camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back and had dinner. It was all very normal. Until we woke up the next day. I need to give some context as to how we slept that night so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler in a stereo that we brought in the car and locked it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and put the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest the door of the tent with a gun next to him. We woke up the next morning and I felt fine. I had slept hard and from inside the tent everything seemed normal. When we got out, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown and food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces laying next to a tree. All of the car doors were open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute in silence just taking everything in. The woods felt off now. It was quiet and not the beautiful campsite that I saw yesterday. Everything about those woods felt wrong now. My ex accused me of not locking the car the night before and that an animal got in our stuff. I promised that I had locked it and went into the tent to grab the keys from my backpack, but they weren't there. I found them later on the ground right next to the car. We quickly threw everything in the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what had just happened. He finally spoke up when we were almost home and told me that he had had a dream the night before about something kneeling over him in the tent holding his gun, and just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again and said he didn't want to talk about it and that I shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I've tried to forget about it, but I just can't. Something really wrong happened to us in the woods that night. I always wonder what they were planning for me. I was around 13 years old and at the shopping center with my parents. I wanted to go off on my own and wander around by myself for a while, and my parents agreed. After a little while, I was stopped by a woman in casual clothes. She told me that she was an undercover cop and I was suspected of shoplifting. Because I was young, I was terrified. I didn't ask her for ID or anything like that. I didn't know I could question authority. She asked to look through my bag and I let her, insisting I hadn't stolen anything. She asked me how old I was, who I was there with. Then she asked me something that still sends chills down my spine. Are your parents expecting you to go home with them tonight? I told her of course they were, why wouldn't they be? She then insisted I had to follow her to go and figure out this shoplifting thing. I went. She was leading me towards the exit. By the grace of God, before we got there, we bumped into my dad. He asked what was going on, and I told him. As I was explaining the situation, the woman got on her phone and was talking to someone saying things like, "Oh, this isn't the right girl." Then hangs up and says, "Sorry, wrong person," and abruptly walks off. My dad and I stood there dumbfounded. When my mom found out about the situation, she was really unimpressed by the way the undercover cop handled the situation. She took me to center management the next day and complained to them about how I was treated by their undercover cop. When the woman answers, "We don't employ undercover cops in this center," I have no idea what that woman had planned for me, but I thank my lucky stars every day that we ran into my dad. I didn't order pizza. This happened quite a while ago when I was home alone with just my dog. After all this time, I'm sure what happened was really strange and I have no idea what this man actually wanted. So I was watching TV one night at about 11 p.m. when I heard a car pull up outside and the engine shut off. I figured it was obviously a neighbor, but nosy dog wanted to have a look and went to the window. He'd kind of messed the blinds up when he went to look, so I got up to fix them. When I did, I noticed a car parked on the street across from my house and my neighbor's house. I couldn't really make out any details, but it looked like the driver was still sitting in the car. I didn't really think anything of it. I got a drink and went back to watching TV. Quite a while had passed since I fixed the blinds, but I'm not sure how long. I'd guess 15 to 20 minutes. Out of nowhere, I thought I heard a tapping at the door. Not a knock, it was much lighter and very quiet. My dog had sat up to look at the door and I paused the TV when the same tapping then started on the window. I opened the blinds a little and saw a man standing there. I couldn't make out his face properly and he immediately walked back to the door and started tapping at it again. This doesn't sound very frightening and I'm not sure why, but I suddenly had a really awful feeling. I felt absolutely terrified and had no idea why. The tapping at the door never stopped, but something in my head was saying if I opened the door to him then something really bad would happen. I went upstairs to open a window to ask what he wanted. It felt safer doing this. He said in a really quiet voice he was delivering pizza and told me how much it cost. I felt so stupid for being frightened and told him I didn't order pizza. I guessed he was speaking quietly and knocking lightly so he didn't disturb my neighbors. My dog had followed me upstairs and was letting out the odd growl and bark, which isn't really unusual for him. I was trying to shush him when the man downstairs told me he had the correct address and I better get downstairs now and open the door to pay what I owed and collect my food before it got cold. I was really confused because I most definitely didn't order any food and began telling him that again when I noticed he didn't have a pizza. He wasn't carrying anything at all. I told him again that he had the wrong address and he got really angry. He kept telling me to open the door. He was going between angry and sort of trying to persuade me to go back downstairs. I asked him where the pizza was. He said he had hold of it. It was really dark, but he definitely didn't have anything in his hands. My dog was really making quite a bit of fuss at this point and the stranger had turned into a broken record. "Come downstairs. Open the door. Come downstairs and open the door. All the noise must have alerted my neighbor who did open his front door. And the man didn't say a word but practically ran across the street to the car that I had heard pull up a while ago. He went back to the car empty-handed. I have no idea what he wanted, but he certainly wasn't a delivery driver. It really freaked me out as well that my dog is quite obviously a large breed and the man saw him through the window. He wasn't deterred at all. It seems even stranger and less random that he actually drove to my house as though he'd planned on showing up.